There comes a time when the veil of deception lifts, and the weight of truth becomes undeniable. Have you ever witnessed someone go to extreme lengths to tarnish your name, only for their own lies to collapse under their desperation? The universe has a way of balancing the scales, of revealing what was once hidden, of ensuring that deception is never a permanent foundation. You, as a chosen one, have likely felt the sting of betrayal, the burden of being misunderstood, the frustration of watching liars and manipulators bask in temporary victories. But time has a way of unraveling falsehoods, and the very people who once smeared your name will soon find themselves drowning in the wreckage of their own deceit. They thought they had you cornered. They whispered in the right ears, planted doubts where there should have been trust, and for a moment, they walked with the false confidence of the victorious. They counted on your silence, mistook your peace for weakness, and laughed as they watched you stand alone. But what they never understood is that silence is a storm waiting to be unleashed. The truth does not need to announce itself, it simply is. And when it emerges, it does not ask for permission. It does not need validation. It simply shines so brightly that the shadows of deceit can no longer exist. This is not just a story about betrayal. It's a testament to the power of truth. It's about how, no matter how far someone sinks to hurt you, no matter how deep they dig their pit of lies, they will always end up burying themselves in it. You don't need to fight, you don't need to prove anything. The weight of truth will do the work for you. The question is, are you ready to watch it happen? If you've ever felt the burden of being falsely accused, if you've ever seen people turn against you based on lies, type 77 in the comments. Your experience is valid, and your truth will not remain in the dark forever. The illusion of power, how they thought they won. For a time, they walked with their heads held high, convinced that they had successfully rewritten reality. They told their version of the story so many times that they started to believe it themselves. With every whisper, every calculated move, every deceitful glance, they tightened their grip on the illusion of control. They knew the right words to say, the right emotions to fake, the right people to manipulate. The game was simple: paint themselves as the victim while turning you into the villain. And it worked, at least for a while. They took pleasure in your suffering, mistaking your silence for surrender. They relished the way people looked at you differently, the way your once loyal allies hesitated before speaking your name. They saw their influence spread like wildfire, and with every confirmation nod, every side-eyed glance in your direction, they grew bolder. To them, power wasn't about truth, it was about perception. They crafted an illusion so elaborate that they believed it could never be questioned. And yet, beneath their carefully curated persona, behind every staged performance, there was a crack waiting to spread. The thing about illusions is that they require constant maintenance. Lies must be fed, narratives must be controlled, and doubt must be extinguished before it has the chance to ignite. They could not afford for people to think too deeply, to question inconsistencies, to remember who you truly are. They built their empire on deception. But what they failed to realize is that no structure stands forever when its foundation is built on falsehood. They underestimated one thing: the resilience of truth. The universe does not bend to the will of manipulators, nor does it grant them protection from the consequences of their actions. And yet, in their arrogance, they believed they had won. They paraded their fabricated victories, walked with the air of the untouchable, convinced that their reign would last forever. What they did not anticipate was the slow unraveling of their own facade. They thought they were untouchable, but the illusion they relied on was already slipping through their fingers. The cracks begin to show subtle signs of exposure. At first it was nothing, just a fleeting moment, a pause too long, a glance that lingered where it shouldn't. A word spoken with hesitation, a question asked with a little too much curiosity. They ignored it, convinced it was nothing, but deep down they felt it, the beginning of something they couldn't quite name, something they desperately wanted to dismiss. People started noticing things, little inconsistencies, things that didn't quite add up. The way their stories subtly changed depending on who they were speaking to, the way they over-explained when no explanation was needed. the way their confidence wavered ever so slightly when someone pressed them for details. It was small at first, subtle, almost imperceptible, but deception is fragile, and once the first crack appears, it's only a matter of time before the entire structure collapses. They saw the shift. The same people who once hung onto their every word now seemed hesitant. Conversations that once flowed easily now felt forced. People who once stood beside them so assuredly now carried a shadow of doubt. It was in the way someone no longer responded to their messages as quickly, in the way an old friend started avoiding eye contact. They could feel it. The control they once wielded was slipping, and the fear began to creep in. But rather than retreat, rather than acknowledge that their lies were losing traction, they did what manipulators always do: they doubled down. They became more animated, more defensive, more insistent. They needed people to believe them, and they needed it desperately. They started repeating their accusations more often, hoping that the sheer force of repetition would make it true. They started lashing out at those who hesitated, labeling them as traitors, as fools who had been deceived by you. And yet, no matter how much they tried to tighten their grip, the unraveling had already begun. You didn't have to do a thing. The weight of their own desperation was exposing them more effectively than anything you could ever say. They thought they had built an unbreakable narrative, but the truth does not need an army to defend it. It only needs time, and time was no longer on their side. The desperation, their panic, and downfall. When manipulators sense their grip loosening, when they realize the control they once wielded is slipping through their fingers, they do not retreat with grace. They panic. At first, it's subtle, an increase in their usual tactics, a more aggressive push to reinforce the lies they once whispered so effortlessly. But desperation does not breed wisdom, it breeds recklessness. They begin to speak too much, too often, over-explaining to those who never asked, trying to justify things that were never in question. They start pressing harder, reaching further, trying to regain the power that is visibly escaping them. Their once carefully constructed narratives now feel forced, unnatural, as if even they can sense the walls closing in. The people who once followed their every word no longer seem as convinced, their nods of agreement no longer as eager, their expressions now holding a trace of something dangerous: doubt. And that doubt spreads like wildfire. It starts with one person, a former supporter who begins to question the inconsistencies, a close ally who starts seeing the cracks for what they are. Then, like an unspoken current in the air, others begin to take notice. The weight of their deception begins pressing against them, and in response, they escalate. What was once subtle manipulation becomes blatant hostility. The passive-aggressive whispers become outright attacks. Their frustration spills over into every interaction, their words laced with an urgency that was never there before. They raise their voices, not because they are more confident, but because they are afraid. They try to redirect the growing suspicion back onto you, hurling new accusations in a last-ditch effort to regain control. But the more they fight, the more obvious it becomes. Their panic is the clearest sign of their downfall. The thing about lies is that they require maintenance. Every falsehood must be supported by another, every deception must be reinforced with even more convincing theatrics, and eventually, the weight of their own performance becomes too heavy to bear. They start contradicting themselves, telling different versions of the same story, unaware that people are beginning to compare notes. Their web of deceit, once intricately woven, starts tangling in on itself. And as their credibility crumbles, so does the power they once held. They watch helplessly as the world they built on deception begins to slip away, and in their desperation, they do what manipulators always do when they realize they are losing. They lash out at everyone. They blame their closest allies, accuse their once loyal followers of betrayal, turn on the very people they once sought to manipulate. And in doing so, they unknowingly seal their fate. Because nothing is more telling than a manipulator who can no longer maintain the act. The more they unravel, the more the truth becomes undeniable. And as their downfall accelerates, they can do nothing but watch in horror as the empire they built on lies collapses under its own weight. The turning point the moment everyone saw the truth. It happens suddenly, yet somehow it feels inevitable. A moment in time where all the whispers, all the side glances, all the creeping suspicions collide into a single, undeniable realization: everything they once claimed is a lie. The moment of reckoning is not always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet shift, an unspoken consensus that spreads without warning. One day they are in control, their words carrying weight, their influence unquestioned. The next, the silence around them is deafening. Someone asks a question they never expected to hear. A friend, once unwavering in their support, hesitates before responding. A social circle, once filled with laughter at their fabricated stories, grows eerily still when their name is mentioned. It is in these tiny moments that everything changes. They feel it before they fully understand it. The looks that linger too long, the conversations that end when they enter the room. The way people avoid making eye contact. At first, they try to ignore it, convince themselves that it's nothing. But then the proof surfaces. It could be anything: a message screenshot, an old recording, a witness finally stepping forward. Or maybe it's simply the accumulation of all their contradictions, stacking up into an inescapable mountain of truth. And suddenly, the narrative they fought so hard to control is no longer in their hands. People are talking, but not in the way they once did. The questions are no longer whispered in secrecy, they are spoken aloud with conviction. And worst of all, no one is rushing to their defense. They attempt damage control. They issue vague explanations, frantic justifications, hollow excuses that no longer hold weight. But the turning point has already passed. The audience that once believed them is no longer listening. Their stories, once seen as gospel, are now met with skepticism. The very people they deceived begin piecing the puzzle together, realizing that the villain in the story was never you, it was always them. The shift is irreversible. The power dynamic flips. And suddenly, the ones who once controlled the narrative are the ones being scrutinized. They are the ones being questioned, doubted, whispered about in hushed voices, and there is nothing they can do to stop it. They wanted to control how people saw you. Now, they are powerless to control how people see them. The unraveling when they lose everything. There is no grand explosion, no dramatic climax where they get to make a final stand. Instead, it is slow, painful, humiliating. They begin to notice how empty the spaces around them feel. The phone calls they once received frequently now go unanswered. The invitations stop coming. Their once loyal allies now keep their distance, too afraid of being caught in the fallout. No one wants to be associated with a fraud. No one wants to be the one who defended a liar. They show up at gatherings, workplaces, social events, only to be met with uncomfortable silence. People exchange glances when they enter. Conversations shift in tone, laughter dies in their presence. The ones who once adored them now look through them as if they no longer exist. And in a way, they don't. The version of themselves they so carefully crafted, the persona they worked so hard to maintain, is gone. They are no longer the charismatic manipulator, the master of deception. They are simply exposed. Desperation takes on a new form. They try to reclaim what was lost, but their attempts feel empty, performative. They post carefully worded messages, feigning strength, pretending they are unaffected. But the silence in the comment sections, the lack of engagement, the absence of the validation they once thrived on, it's crushing. They scroll through their social media, watching as people interact with others, but never with them. They sit in meetings where their voice once dominated, now struggling to be heard. The weight of isolation sets in. They begin to feel the very rejection they once tried to impose on you. They once reveled in your downfall, now they are drowning in their own. And the most painful part, you didn't have to do a thing. You didn't have to expose them, didn't have to fight back, didn't have to lift a single finger. They did it to themselves. They told themselves they were untouchable, that their lies were impenetrable, that they would never be caught. But the truth has a way of making itself known, of whispering into the ears of those who need to hear it, of revealing itself at the perfect moment. And now, there is no escaping it. They built their world on deception, and now that world is crumbling beneath their feet. The same people who once defended them are now too ashamed to admit they ever believed them. The same friends who once laughed at their stories now want nothing to do with them. The same power they clung to has dissolved into nothing. They are alone. Their voice no longer holds weight. Their presence no longer commands attention. And no matter how much they fight, how much they struggle, how much they try to rewrite history, they cannot undo what has been done. Because the truth was never on their side, and now they must live with the consequences. The chosen one's response strength in silence. There was a time when you might have felt the urge to defend yourself, to correct every lie, to set the record straight. But chosen ones understand a deeper truth. Some battles are won not by fighting, but by standing still. The greatest response to deception is not retaliation, but indifference. They expected you to react. They counted on your anger, your desperation, your need to be understood. They wanted you to panic, to scramble, to beg for justice. But you didn't. You refused to give them the performance they were waiting for, and that is what broke them. Silence is not weakness, it is power. It forces people to think, to question, to observe without distraction. The moment you stopped engaging, the energy shifted. Their accusations, once fueled by your reactions, now hung in the air like unanswered questions. They repeated their lies, but without your response, those lies became empty echoes, bouncing off walls with no one left to believe them. And in that silence, people started noticing. They saw how one-sided the obsession was. They saw how much effort was being put into tearing you down, and they began to wonder, if you were truly the villain, why did you not defend yourself? If you had something to hide, why were you so at peace? You see, manipulators need chaos to survive. They thrive in drama, in back-and-forth exchanges, in constant justifications and explanations. Without that, they flounder. Your silence became their undoing. It forced them to speak louder, to exaggerate further, to expose their own instability. While they spiraled, you remained steady. While they screamed for attention, you walked away. And in doing so, you shattered the illusion they worked so hard to maintain. True strength is not in proving your worth to others. It is in knowing your worth, regardless of what is said about you. Chosen ones do not chase validation. They do not fight to be understood. They trust in the weight of truth, knowing that it does not need their hands to carry it. And now, as their world crumbles, as they feel the suffocating consequences of their own actions, you remain untouched, unbothered, untouchable, because you never needed to prove anything. The truth did that for you. The energy shift why they're forced into isolation. Energy does not lie. When someone spends their life manipulating, deceiving, and orchestrating chaos, that energy returns to them in full force. It starts subtly, the weight of their own actions pressing against them, the realization that the people who once believed in them are slowly stepping away. They try to deny it, but energy cannot be ignored. The shift is happening, and they can feel it in every room they walk into. Conversations pause when they enter. People who once greeted them with enthusiasm now offer polite nods, avoiding prolonged interaction. Their presence no longer commands attention, it drains it. They feel it in the workplace, in social settings, even within their own homes. The warmth they once took for granted is gone, replaced with a growing discomfort they cannot escape. They are being avoided, not because of what they said, but because of what they became. Energy is contagious. People do not want to be associated with deception, with manipulation, with negativity. And so, one by one, their allies step away. Some leave quietly, without a word, simply choosing distance over confrontation. Others make it clear they no longer want to be a part of the toxicity. Their phone stops ringing. Their messages go unanswered. The people who once stood by their side now stand at a distance, watching, hesitant, unwilling to be caught in the same downfall. They tell themselves it's temporary, that people are just being influenced by outside forces. But deep down, they know the truth. They are the common denominator. They are the ones being abandoned. They are the ones who poison the energy around them. And no amount of explaining, no amount of justification, no amount of desperate attempts to regain their old status can change that. The isolation is not punishment, it is consequence. The universe is balancing the scales. The same manipulation that once gave them power is now the reason they are powerless. And as they sit alone, surrounded by the echoes of their own making, they finally begin to understand. When you build your existence on control, the moment you lose it, you have nothing left. Why they're haunted by their own actions. Regret is a quiet torment, one that does not announce itself but lingers in the spaces between thoughts. At first, they tried to dismiss it, convincing themselves they had done nothing wrong. They justified their actions, blamed you, blamed others, blamed circumstances beyond their control. But the mind does not forget, and the soul knows when it has done harm. They start replaying their own words, their own choices, the moments when they could have stopped but didn't. At night, when there is no one left to validate them, no one left to reinforce their lies, the weight of their actions settles on their chest like a stone. They begin to wonder, was it worth it? Did they really win? Because if they had, why do they feel this way? Why does the victory they once celebrated now taste like ash? The people they manipulated have moved on. The ones they betrayed have healed. But they remain trapped in the past, haunted not just by what they did, but by what they have become. They see it in the way people look at them, the hesitation in every interaction, the shift in energy that they can no longer ignore. No one is saying anything, yet they feel it. The discomfort, the unspoken judgment, the quiet acknowledgement that they are no longer who they once pretended to be. They scroll through their old messages, searching for the validation that once gave them confidence. They revisit the past, trying to convince themselves that they were in the right. But the truth is undeniable now. They lost something they can never get back: trust, credibility, the illusion of control. They are not haunted by ghosts. They are haunted by themselves, by the realization that every lie they told, every game they played, every act of deception has led them here. This is the part they never prepared for. They spent so much time trying to destroy you, they never considered what would happen when they succeeded only in destroying themselves. And the worst part, you never had to do anything. They handed themselves their own downfall, and now there is no escape from the consequences. No one is chasing them. No one is fighting them. The silence they once weaponized has turned against them, and the echoes of their own actions follow them wherever they go. The ultimate victory when you rise without retaliation. There was a time when you thought you needed justice, when you believed you had to fight for people to see the truth. But chosen ones do not need to force their victory. They do not need to shout their innocence or beg the world to understand them. The truth does not need a defense. It only needs time. And in time, everything has aligned exactly as it was meant to. They expected you to seek revenge. They expected you to retaliate, to chase after the validation they so desperately needed themselves. But you didn't. You let them have their moment, let them spin their stories, let them convince themselves that they had won. And while they exhausted themselves trying to control the narrative, you focused on something far more powerful: your growth. You chose to rise. And that is the victory they never saw coming. There is something undeniably threatening about a person who refuses to break. They set every trap, and yet you never stumbled. They spread every lie, and yet you never chased after the truth. They poured their energy into your downfall, and yet you flourished in silence. Nothing terrifies manipulators more than the realization that they never had control to begin with. They built their strategies on the assumption that you needed approval, that you needed their acceptance. But the moment you chose yourself, the moment you walked away and allowed the weight of truth to do what it does best, they lost everything. And now they have to watch. They have to witness you stepping fully into your power, untouched, unshaken, untouchable. They have to see your name spoken with admiration instead of doubt. They have to see you thrive in spaces they once tried to exile you from. Every attempt to break you only sharpened your resolve. Every attack only made you stronger. And now they have no choice but to sit in the aftermath of their own destruction while you continue to rise, unstoppable. This is what they never understood. Chosen ones are not meant to fall. The more they try to tear you down, the higher you ascend, because your power was never in retaliation. It was never in proving them wrong. It was in knowing, deep in your soul, that they were never strong enough to define you. And now, as they fade into irrelevance, as they struggle under the weight of their own deception, you walk forward, victorious, because you never needed to fight to win. The cosmic justice, why the truth always wins. The universe is not random. There is a balance to all things, a sacred order that ensures what is sown is also reaped. Manipulators believe they are above this law, that through deception and control, they can bend reality to their will. But the cosmic scales cannot be bribed, cannot be tricked, cannot be swayed by illusion. What is taken through dishonesty will always be returned in loss. What is built on lies will always crumble under the weight of truth. For a time, they seemed to escape consequence. They moved freely, untouched by the harm they caused, convinced that their version of reality would hold forever. But truth is not bound by time. It does not rush, does not panic, it waits. And when it arrives, it does so with the force of inevitability. It does not need witnesses to be real. It does not need validation to exist. And no matter how far they ran, no matter how tightly they clung to their deception, the truth followed. There is a reason chosen ones are tested in ways others are not. You were meant to see beyond the surface, to understand the deeper workings of divine justice. You were never meant to fight battles rooted in ego. Your task was always to walk in alignment, to trust that what is meant for you cannot be taken, and that those who attempt to steal from you will ultimately lose everything. And now they know. They feel it in every aspect of their lives, the energy shift, the loss of control, the unraveling of the very identity they spent so much time constructing. They are not being punished. They are being taught. They are being forced to face the reality of who they are, stripped of the illusions they once hid behind. This is the lesson they never wanted, but can no longer escape. This is why you never had to chase justice. The universe was always working on your behalf, ensuring that every wrong done against you would be accounted for. Not through vengeance, not through destruction, but through exposure, through revelation, through the unshakable certainty that no falsehood can stand against the weight of cosmic truth. This is why chosen ones do not seek revenge, because they know they don't have to. The universe has already handled it. Your light was never meant to be diminished. At the end of it all, one truth remains: you were always destined to rise. No amount of deception, no level of manipulation, no temporary setback could ever change that. You are chosen not because you are better, but because you are meant to embody something greater. And with that comes trials, obstacles, and the attempts of lesser minds to dim your light. But they failed. Look at where you stand now. Look at how far you've come. They thought they could break you, but all they did was refine you. They thought they could silence you, but all they did was amplify your truth. They thought they could control how the world saw you, but in the end, they only revealed themselves. And now, they are forced to live in the aftermath of their own choices while you move forward free. You do not carry bitterness. You do not hold on to resentment. You do not waste time seeking closure from people who were never meant to be part of your future, because you have seen firsthand how the universe works. You have watched as truth prevailed without you lifting a single finger. You have felt the shift, the undeniable confirmation that justice was always yours, and that, in itself, is enough. Let them sit in the silence they once tried to force upon you. Let them carry the weight of their own destruction. You have no need to look back, no reason to question what has already been decided. The past no longer has power over you. The lies no longer define you. The attempts to break you no longer matter, because you are still here, still standing, still chosen, and no force in this world could ever change that. Now it's time to walk forward. Your journey is not over. Your light was never meant to be diminished. Keep shining, because nothing, absolutely nothing, can stop what was divinely set in motion for you.